the theme of maintaining tradition in the transitory world. This webinar will be conducted in both English and Japanese with both translation and subtitles. We are going to start with an opening speech from the director of CCD-NL, Yeti van der Madehani.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we continue with our Ikat platform that we launched in July last year, aiming to connect Ikat artisans around the world. And today we will continue with our second Kasuri webinar entitled Maintaining Tradition in a Transitory World, led by Dutch designer Laura Luchtman and Kyozo Shimogawa, our partner in Japan. Issues surrounding the current state of Kasuri, handicraft and traditional products, design process, balancing art project and commercial business, and the boundaries of using Kasuri in contemporary day-to-day product, as well as the involvement of younger generation and the importance of cross-country collaboration as a whole effort to preserve Kasuri will be the highlights of the webinar today. In this webinar, Laura also connects with Digikat artists Nien Siao and Hugo Pilate. CCD-NL hopes that this collaboration will continue to the next level in how Kasuri could inspire Dutch design and creative industry. Also, how such collaboration would benefit other countries that involve at CCD-NL Ikat platform in their efforts to preserving Ikat. So without further ado, on behalf of CCD-NL board and the team, I would like to thank Siebold House Japanese Museum and Japanese Embassy in the Netherlands for announcing the event in their newsletters and or at social media platform. Also, our sincere thank you goes to the Dutch Embassy in Japan for their kind financial support that enable us to carry the webinar today. So I wish you all a wonderful time. Thank you, danko well, and arigato gozaimasu.
Thank you, Yeti, for the very wonderful speech. In this webinar, we will have 4 speakers, and they are Laura Luchtman, Kyozo Shimogawa, Nien Siao, and Hugo Pilate. Laura Luchtman is a textile and service designer and the creative mind behind the studio Kuka, based in Rotterdam. Her work focuses on experimental color and material research. By creating thought-provoking approaches to textile design, color, production, and consumption, she aspires to change our perception and open up opportunities to a more conscious industry. Kyozo Shimogawa is the owner of the company Shimogawa Orimono. He is a third-generation Kurume Kasuri manufacturer. His company, Shimogawa Orimono, was founded in 1948 in Fukuoka, Japan.
So in the previous webinar, Mr. Shimogawa-san explained the history of Kasuri, and during this meeting we will dive a little bit deeper into the current state of Kasuri. So I have prepared some questions.
Okay,
what do you
can I introduce?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, この前はそのカスリの歴史を下川さんが話してくれたので、今日はそのちょっともう少しより詳しい立ち入ったところについてやっていきます。質問いくつか作ったのでこれから言います。
Shimogawa-san, what do you think is the difference between how the Netherlands or Europe deal with handicrafts and traditional production methods in comparison to Japan?
下川さん、ヨーロッパ、オランダを含むヨーロッパと日本の伝統工芸品の扱いについてどのように違うと感じていますか？考えてますか？
はい。これ手短に話したがいいんですかね。
そうですね。ちょっと翻訳しながらになるから、ちょっといいところで一文一文ずつ切っていただけると、ちょっと全部覚えきれない。はい。
日本ではこういうかすりっていうのは、伝統工芸という、 という分野が日本では、存在します。伝統工芸というのは、生活の中で使い続けるということを前提にしています。その中でも、機能性に優れて、デザイン性にも優れているものを伝統工芸として、職人が作り続けてきたという、歴史が日本にはあります。で私が、見てきた中ではやっぱりそのヨーロッパの場合はどちらかというと美術館とか博物館に展示して保存するという傾向がという印象をすごく持ちました。その使い続けることで残していくというのが、日本の、一番大きな特徴だと思っています。
Yes, I think that's a big difference, probably also because we in Europe or in the Netherlands, we have lost a lot of our industries and a lot of our traditional arts and crafts. So all that we have left is actually, yeah, displayed in museums. But also I think, oh yes, translate.
OK、いや、大丈夫。OK。はい、私もそう思います。ヨーロッパでは、産業が変わって、多くのものが失われてしまって、伝統工芸品っていうのは、美術館に展示されていることが多いです。
And I also think that, well, we see these traditional crafts that take so many hours and so many skills to produce. We see these as a really valuable product. So in daily life, we would perhaps not use them. For example, we would only use our silverware when we have some guests coming for dinner, but we wouldn't use it every day. And I think that might be a bit different because yeah, we tend to use really designed products, maybe not so much in daily life, but more for special occasions, I think.
OK。なんか伝統工芸品っていうなんかくくりもちょっと違うように感じていて、例えば、私たちの、ところだったら、その伝統工芸品はなんかどっちかっていうともうちょっとスペシャルなもので、例えば銀食器とかがありますけど、例えば銀食器を毎日使うかって言われたら使わなくて、もうなんか特別なゲストが来た時にしか使わないので、そのような使い方をすると思います。なのでその毎日日常的に使うっていう使い方は違いだと思います。
おそらく日本の場合は日常で使い続けるようになったっていう背景は、一つはやっぱり職人の仕事がなくならないようにずっと継続して仕事として確保するための、手段だったのかなと思ってますね。それともう一つじゃあ、
And one more thing。
職人は最初から熟練した技を持っているわけではないですよね。で、やっぱりそこまでの技術を身につけるまでには時間もかかるし、そういう、若い人職人として育てていくためには、結果的に出来上がった商品も、そういう、未熟な人が作ったものとか熟練したものが人が作ったものとかいろんなランクができてくるんですね。
Yes, I understand. Yeah, and of course it takes many years to learn these crafts and learn these skills, and it probably also takes lots of genuine.
そうですね、わかります。いろんなレベルの人がいて、いろんな世代の人がいるっていうことですね。
だから特別な日に使うものっていうのは熟練した職人の人が作ったもの、日常で使うっていうのは比較的経験の浅い人が作ったものが日常で使われてっていうことで、いろんなそういうなんか世代の職人の人の商品が世の中で使われるような仕組みが出来上がってきたというふうな見解ですね、僕の場合は。
Kind of a, is it a sort of a hierarchy then?
一種のヒエラルキーなんですか？
ああ、そういう言い方もできるんですかね。なんかまあ、師匠と弟子っていう関係が日本ではあります。
So that's more to do with experience and
Yeah.
and time than hierarchy. はい。
いや、そうですね。ヒエラルキーっていうか、まあその経験と時間っていうのが重要になってくるんです。
What do you think designers who want to design for Kasuri need to understand about the current design process? For example, should they draw their sketches by hand or in the same way that your Kasuri artists do? Or can we deliver a design like we would normally do and you would translate it into a design that's suitable for Kasuri?
OK。そのかすり、デザイナーでかすりのデザインをしたいっていう人は、そちらの職人さんがしてるようにな方法でその手書きで書く必要がありますか？それともいつもオランダのデザインをしてるようにデザインして渡してもいいんですか？
そうですね。今はやっぱりコンピューターグラフィックっていうのがあるので、必ずしも手書きである必要はない。ただ僕は考えとしては、やっぱりかすりっていうのは手作業がすごく多いので、やっぱり最初の図案っていうのはやっぱり、手書きの図案にはこだわってます。元のアイデアはそのコンピューターグラフィックで作ったとしても、それを手書きでデザイン用紙に書き起こすっていうことを必ずやってます。
Yeah, so you can really understand how this design works and how you should calculate it, I think.
そうすることでデザインがどのようにできているかが分かるっていうことですね。
そうですね。やっぱり、縦糸と横糸の計算があるので、その見た目だけのこうなんていうかな、精度でいいんですかね。精度じゃなくて、まあ確かめ細かいところまでちょっとそのことで確かめることができるですね。感覚をつかむっていう言い方でいいのかな、なんか。
And I also think it might be, that might be a very nice and good skill to learn and also to better understand how to design for a Kasuri. Yeah.
そうすることでよく理解することができて、良いデザインを作ることができるんですね。
そうですね。僕は常になんて言うんだろう、自分のそういう感性というか感覚っていうのを大事にしているので、まあそのために、まあ、やっぱ手になんていうかな、自分の手とか五感で感じるっていうことはすごくやっぱり大事にしています。
Yeah, that's a nice way of looking at it, to use all the senses to create a design. Yeah.
いいですね。なんかそういう、そのいろんな感覚で見るってことは重要ですね。
そうですね。普通やっぱ触るときって手のひらで触るじゃないですか。一般的に。だけど僕はこっちでも触るけど、こっちでフィーリング掴んだり、こういうとことか、手も何箇所もいろんなところから情報を取るようにしてます。そのフィーリングっていう情報を。
So just like touch the product with the back of your hand to
いや、
have a different feeling.
手の甲でも触って違う感覚も得られるんですね。
そうですね。入ってくる感覚はやっぱり必ずしも指先だけがすごく繊細にできてるわけじゃなくて、やっぱりいろんなそれぞれやっぱりなんていうかな、出てきます。違いがですね、出てくると。
And when you have like commissions and products that you make, how do you ensure the balance between, on one hand, art projects and on the other hand, commercial business? I think you explained a little bit about it in the previous webinar already, and perhaps you can elaborate a bit.
なんか前のウェビナーでもちょっとお聞きしたと思うんですけど、その何かプロジェクトが来た時にそのアート アートとしての側面とビジネスとしての側面をどうやってバランスをとっていますか？
そうですね。これはやっぱり、なんていうかな、ビジネスパートナーの存在はやっぱり必要だと思ってますね。プロジェクトだけをやるんだったらビジネスにはなかなか結びつかないので、やっぱり何かしらビジネスパートナーの存在っていうのがないと、まあ、難しい面もあると思っています。
I think probably these like more art projects can really attract business as well, because then you can really show what is possible and you don't really have a commercial mindset or an end consumer in mind. So you can be really free in what you design. At least for me, that's the case. And that will also attract new business, I think.
そのアートとしての側面を強めることもビジネスにつながるんじゃないですかね。なんかそういうところを側めるとなんかコマーシャルとしての側面も強まるので、私のケースでもそうだったんですよ。
だから、なんだろう、その、新しいコラボレーションで作るっていう場合は、それを作る人っていうのはやっぱりそういう、ビジネス的な側面を考えない人ですね。デザイナー、もう純粋なそのデザイナーの方とやり取りをするんですよ。で、それで物を作るんですけど、あとその出来上がったものをどうするかっていう部分に関しては、やっぱりそういうプロダクトデザイナーの方はアイデアを持ってない場合が多いので、そしたらその時ビジネスパートナーを探して、ビジネスパートナーとあと販売につなげるっていうことをすると、まあ、経済的なものをすることができる。
So in the end, of course, it's very important that the project that are being created also with other designers and artists, that eventually they will lead to products that you can actually sell. Yeah.
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 そうですね。ビジネスパートナーを探してきて、まあ、売るということが必要になってくるんですね。
Perhaps you can also explain a little bit about your collaboration with Nadia, because she's sitting next to you, and it would be nice to hear a little bit about how you will be collaborating together.
あなたの隣にいらっしゃるそのナディアさんとのコラボレーションプロジェクトについてもお聞きしたいんですけれども、どのようにやっていかれますか？
まだ今からどうするかっていうのは、実は具体的なプランっていうのは全然決まってないんですけども、ただ彼女は去年の秋に日本の大学に留学に来てて、まあ、5月末にドイツに帰るんですけど、帰る前にやっぱりもっと日本の、そういう織物とか織とか染めとかいろんな伝統的な技術を学びたいということで、私のところにちょっと1ヶ月半滞在しています。
Okay, and just like learning and seeing how everything works, I guess, and to gather some inspiration.
いや、そうですね。じゃあ一緒に学んだりとかしてインスピレーションを得るんですね。
そうです。だから私は才能を育てるのがすごく好きなんですね。
So, what do you think are the boundaries of using Kurume Kasuri in contemporary day-to-day products? Because you explained that there's a limited width of the fabric. What are the limitations of using Kurume Kasuri in day-to-day products?
OK。クルメガスリと多分その現代的な、生産品とのなんか境界みたいなもの、使用の境界みたいなものっていうのはどのようにお考えですか？
そうですね。現代的なものって、いわゆる量産品みたいな感じですよね。機械を効率よく回すために機械があって人がアシストするっていうのが多分現代的なものだと思ってるんですけど、かすりは手作業、あくまでも職人の技をサポートするためにちょっとだけ機械がある、機械を操作するっていう。ただ車かすりの場合はそれでも、完全に手作業じゃない、ある程度量産ができるっていう製法確立っていうと ころにすごく特徴があります。
So the traditional kazuri is still made by hand for the most part, and the day-to-day products are made by the machines. Or is it a different way how the machines work?
ちょっと下川さんに言いますね。多分かすりはその手だけで作られてるんですかみたいなことをおっしゃってるので、その手だけのものありますけど、でも必ず織り機とか入ってきますし、多分そこをちょっと説明して差し上げた方がいいのかもしれないですね。そのマシーンが占める割合というか、どういうふうにその今おっしゃられたイメージが多分その手で大体作ってから機械を入れるのかみたいなこともおっしゃってたので。
ですね、オートメーションで動く機械じゃなくて、人がこう操作しないと動かないような、機械ですよね。
Yes, so it's not completely automated, but it does require by hand of the machine. Yeah. Okay, so one of the lines of a product Kurume Kasuri would be that still requires a lot of craftsmen to handle the machines and to program everything.
そのくるめがすりだとかすりを作るのでも、その機械に対してすごくいろいろ操作しないといけないんですね。
やっぱり結局この手ので感覚掴んで機械操作してるんですよね。
So you feel like with your hands you can sense if the tension of the yarns is correct.
その手で糸の張りがいいかとか見るんですよねって。
そうです、そう
です。Yes, yes.
And you're using other tools, right? They're using sticks to set the pattern right. Is that correct?
Okay.
I was checking on the pattern if it's like because it's changed. I mean, the tension between the thread, they change through time, so they use sticks to kind of keep the pattern the same.
Okay. So these sticks, you also have to manage the whole time to keep the tension the same, or yeah.
If I understood it right.
そう今ナジャさんは機械のとこになんか竹串みたいな、なんていうんですかね、名前があれを刺してもうやってますよねっていう、非常に精密に。
そうですね。
And also in terms of like limitations to the kazuri making, you explained that there's limitations in the width of the fabric. It's like 38 centimeters wide, and of course traditionally these fabrics were made for kimono. So is there some limitations in how these fabrics can be used in more like contemporary products?
その前に説明してくださった通り、かすりっていうのはなんか38センチの図案用紙で作るっていう幅の制約があると思うんですけど、それを現代の生産品になんか使えるというようなことってあるんですか？
狭い幅でしょ。
そうです。
日本では、これも江口さんがご存知だからもうあれでしょうけど、幅を継いで、洋服を、それこそ僕が今着てるこういうジャケットもかすりで幅を継いで作ってますし、帽子とかバッグとか、インテリアでも幅広くいろんなものに使われていますので、やっぱり縫い合わせて幅を広くするっていうことでいろんなものに使われていますね。
So that's really, creative way to solve the width limitations, just to stitch them together and make a wider fabric that way.
その、やり方は、そうやって広幅にするっていうやり方はついでクリエイティブですね。
そうですね。あとやっぱりこう、あんまり無駄が出ないようなデザインに使われることが多いので、生地幅を有効的に使って、あんまりなんていうかな、裁断くずっていうんですかね、
あ
そういうのが出ないようなものをデザインしている場合が多いので、まあ、そういうサステナビリティな記事だと言えますね。
Yeah, so you really think about what will the product be, and then just calculate how much fabric you need to make this product without having a lot of cutting waste in the end.
そうやって先に、幅を計算して、ついでその幅にすることで布のゴミの量を減らしてますね。
そうですね。はい。
Yes, yes.
And perhaps it's also, yeah, if I think I would design for Kasuri, I might think about how I could use the limitation of the width, just use the 38 centimeters width of the fabric and see what I could make with that, just to see, yeah, just design within the limitations, because that can also create some creative ideas and new ideas. I would really see it as maybe a table runner that we use here to set tables. It's not like a tablecloth, but it's narrower, so you only use it for your own plate, let's say, or like a nice panel to hang on the wall as an art piece. I can imagine something like that.
私もデザインするっていうことをしたいなと思ってるんですけど、その38センチの制限っていうのは逆になんかいろいろなクリエイティビティを刺激しますね。例えば、今考えてるのはそのテーブルの上のテーブルランナーってありますよね。テーブルランナーとかもいいなって思いますし、あとその壁にかけるそのアートパネルのようなものにもできるなっていうふうに思ってます。
実際使われて、そういう使われ方も一部ではやっぱされてます。マンションとかホテルのエレベーターホールにこう飾る、なんていうインスタレーションっていうかな、まあ、そういうタペストリー的なもの使われたりすることもありますし、まあ、そういうテーブル、まあ、そういうテーブルマットっていうかな、ランチョンマットみたいなのもですね、多分で僕はそれですごく気がついたのはやっぱり日本のとやっぱそういう、まあ、オランダとかヨーロッパではテーブル、ランチョンマット一つにしても標準的なサイズがすごく違うっていうことに作ってみたらすごく気がついたんですね。そういうのも含めてやっぱり面白いなと思いますね。国によってサイズとかが違うので作ってみて、したらやっぱり例えばオランダとかで標準的に使われている大きさと日本で使ってる大きさとかが全然違ってたりするのに作ってみたら気がついて、でもやっぱ伝統とか文化とかその生活習慣の上に成り立っているものだなっていうことに気がついて、まあすごく興味深かったっていう話。
Yeah, but I can imagine because I'm sure we have also different ways of like setting the table and of eating. So yeah, that would probably be different.
そうですね。私たちはその、テーブルのセッティングとかも違いますからいろいろな違いがありますね。
そうなんです。そうなんです。だからまあちょっとそれでやっぱりそのプロダクトっていう部分でそういうデザイナーの方となんかも作るっていうものと、あとそうビジネス的に商業的にその商品として作るっていう時はやっぱりちょっと考え方とかも少し切り離してやる必要があるなっていうのをちょっとそういうところでちょっと僕はちょっと気がついたというかですね。そうですね。やっぱり実際商品としてこう生活の中で使ってもらえるようなものにするってなってきたら、やっぱりただプロダクトデザイナーの方と組んでなんかそういう商品作るだけじゃなくて、そういう流通させるには商品として流通するにはどうしたらいいかっていうまた別のことを考えなきゃいけなくなるので、さっき話したビジネスパートナーの存在っていうのは、まあ、そういうところにつながってきます。
In order to like preserve the craft of Kasuri and make sure that it will continue in the future, of course, you need also new generations to become interested in learning about Kasuri and also in making the Kasuri. How do you think, or what is needed for the younger generation of Japanese to become more interested in designing, making, and using Kurume Kasuri?
その若い世代に継承していくっていうことが必要だと思うんですけど、かすりとかそのどうしたらどういうふうにしたら何が必要だと思いますか？その若い世代にかすりを作ってもらったりとか使ってもらったりするにあたって何が必要だと思いますか？
まあ一つはやっぱり例えば若い世代っていうよりももうするためにやっぱその親の世代とかですね、年配の人たちがそれを大事にしてきたとか使い続けてきたっていうそういう土壌がまずあることが大事だなというふうに思ってますね。
But I can imagine that, like, I think in creating these Kasuri fabrics, you need, I think, some kind of 30 processes, and that requires 3 months of complete traditional Kasuri fabric. I can imagine that the new generation that is very used to like having little patience and have everything at a display just pressing a button or anything, that it might be hard to get them engaged in such a lengthy process that takes so much patience. How can we make sure that even younger generations are attracted to something like this, something like that takes so much time to create?
そのかすりってその30工程とかすごい工程があるっていうふうに聞きましたけど、今の若い世代とかはなんかもう全部なんかスマホとかでボタン押せば何でもできるみたいなことに慣れちゃってる世代ですけど、その彼らになんかそういう手間がかかるプロセスもすごく魅力的だって分かってもらうにはどうしたらいいんでしょうかね。ありますかねみたいな。
やっぱり外からの視点っていうのが大事だなとも思います。これはもう僕自身も含めてですけども、やっぱ生活の中で使い続けるって最初に言いましたけど、逆に生活の中で普通にありすぎて、その価値をなかなか見出せなくなっていくっていう怖さもあると思ってます。
So, do you think that like a collaboration between Japanese craftsmen and, let's say, Dutch designers can help bring these Japanese crafts back to the attention of Japanese people, but also to people in Europe and the Netherlands?
じゃあそのオランダのデザイナーと日本の職人が組んでやるっていうことは、その日本のそういう人たちとかもしくはヨーロッパの人たちに還元できるっていうふうにお考えですか？
そうですね。やっぱり実はこれを気づかせてくれたのは65年前にオランダから日本に来た、ヤコブ・ランゲビスっていう人だったんですね。これはいろいろ調べたらそういうふうに書かれてたんですけど、世界中でもうなくなって、ヨーロッパではもうそういう職人がいなくなって作られなくなったイカットがですね、日本ではまだどんどん生産されて、みんな着物で着ているっていう光景をですね、そのランゲビスっていう人が見たときに、これって世界から見たらすごいことなんだよっていうのを日本人に教えてくれたそうなんです。
I think it's the same here because, of course, in the Netherlands we have lost a lot of also traditional Dutch designs or crafts, and I think that there's a saying that what comes from afar is nice, it's more attractive maybe or more interesting. So I can imagine that if someone maybe in Japan should start using the Dutch traditions or the Dutch crafts and designs, that we might think it's more attractive because someone else is using it and in a new way. And yeah, I think that works the same here.
そうです。オランダでも同じことが起こってると思います。その今オランダではいろんなその伝統的なものが失われていますけど、例えば日本の人がなんかオランダのそういう伝統的なものを身につけて新しい使い方とかを提案したりしてたら、それはもうすごく魅力があるなというふうに、オランダの人たちも思うなと思います。
本当にそこに関してはもう僕も全く同じ考えですね。
So that's why like these cross-country collaborations can be very important to sustain these crafts in the future.
だからこうしてその2国間でコラボして文化交流するってことが未来にとって大事ですね。
そうですね。それともう一つ僕みたいな職人がそういう交流することのすごく特徴としてはですね、入り口がビジネスから入っていかないっていうところがすごくいいわけですよ。そういう文化とか歴史とか伝統を学ぶっていう入り口から入るっていうのが、これは普通のただのビジネスマンだったらできないことなので、そのことでそういう若い世代とかより多くの人に関心を持ってもらいたいというふうに思ってるんですね。
Yes, definitely. Yeah, you can really explain everything, and because you know it yourself, it's very hard for an agent or let's say a businessman to explain all this because he doesn't have the experience himself.
そうビジネスマンだったらできないですよね。なぜならその下川さんは職人だから自分の経験が終わりだからそれはできることですね。
Do you think that I noticed that Japanese design is becoming, or maybe it is for a while, it's quite of a trend in Europe now. And also sometimes these Kasuri designs are translated into a design that is printed on fabric. Do you think that threats the existence of the craft of Kasuri?
その今かすりのなんか例えば柄がその何ですかね、プリントされたりとかそういうのあるじゃないですか。けどなんかそういうのがありますけど、なんかそういうことについてはどう思いますかみたいな。多分ヨーロッパのそういうあるのかな、インテリアとかに。
僕は割とそこは肯定的ですね。そんだけかすりのデザインっていうかに魅力があるからプリントでも作りたいってなるだろうという解釈ですね。
I can also imagine if you like have these beautifully traditionally made Kasuri fabrics and then you have the printed fabric on the side, that you can clearly see the difference. Even to someone who might not know how much work goes into creating this woven fabric.
なんかすごく精巧に作られたかすりの布があって、それとプリントされたなんかかすりの布があったとするじゃないですか、プリントの布がね。でそれの時に会った時にもし何も分かってない人がいたらそっちのその手間とか分かってもらえると思いますかねみたいな。
これはもう価値観は人それぞれなので、やっぱりそういうプリントとかの安い方をもちろん選択する人もそれなりに、いるとは思いますけども、これはもうやっぱり選択するのは自由なので僕らはただもうそういう、僕らが作ってるそういう手仕事のですね、かすりの、本物の、価値とか魅力っていうのをもう少しでも知ってもらうように、そこは、なんかいろんな情報発信とかをいろんな伝えるっていう活動をもう地道に続けていくしかないでしょうねそこは。
Yes, I think so too, because when you have these mass-produced products, And these printed textiles, maybe those are of course not that cherished. Mainly they are thrown away or discarded quite quickly, and of course the mass production and the waste in fabric and textiles and clothing is a very big problem. So I also believe that by explaining how much effort and how much time and how much knowledge and craft and skill goes into a product like this can help people understand the value more, and maybe also they are willing to pay a little bit more than for the mass-produced products.
その今大量消費、大量生産、大量消費っていうのがありますけど、そういったものを買う彼らに例えばそのかすりとかがどうやってちゃんとどのようないかなる努力を払って作られて、どれだけ時間かかっているかとか、そういう情報を伝えてあげるっていうことが重要だと思います。
そうですね、僕もそれはもちろんそう思いますけど、ただ多分、手間暇とか、どんだけこう手間暇かけて作ってるかを、説明したらその人たちが納得してかすりを買うかどうかっていうのはわからないじゃないですか。だからそういう海外の、オランダのデザイナーとかとコラボレーションしたりとか、その人たちが想像もしないようなこうプレゼンテーションっていうかな、なんかことをやってみせるっていうですね、なんかその人たちが感動して夢をこう持つようなことを僕たちはやると、その人たちは興味を持ってくれると思います。
So just explaining the process and the craft isn't enough to convince consumers to buy kasuri, but the design is, maybe even more important in the end.
ただそうです、わかりました。その情報をただ与えるだけではダメで、やっぱり最終的にはデザイナーが大事ってことになってくるんですね。
誰もが想像したことがないような、びっくりするようなことをやるっていうことがすごくなんか大事というかですね、インパクトがやっぱより多くの人に価値を知ってもらう一つの手段だとは思います。
So it really goes hand in hand, I think.
もうこれはもうただ単にデザインだけじゃなくて、なんていうかな、そういうプロジェクトのその企画の内容とかですね、ただ単にその商品だけじゃないところでのですね、なんかトータル的な取り組みっていうんかな、なんかそういうところをひっくるめて、すごくこうちょっとインパクトのあるようなことをするっていうことですよね。例えばオランダにクルメガスの職人がオランダとかフランスとかヨーロッパのいろんな国を訪問したことは、歴史上なかったけども、僕がそれを、ここ数年間やっているっていうことも、その220年の歴史の中で見るとすごくインパクトがあることなんですね。そういうことをこう絶えずやり続けるっていうことかなと思ってます。
Hopefully we can travel again very soon when the COVID pandemic is over, hopefully, and we can really get these projects off the ground again.
もうすぐね、自らその旅行できるようになってできるといいんですけどね。
そうですね。確かに、今はちょっとまだしばらくはですね、ヨーロッパに行くっていうのは難しいかもしれないけども、気持ちはもうヨーロッパに行ってますので。
Yes, my heart is already back in Japan, but
私もすでにもう、心は日本に帰ってます。
And in terms of modernization and introduction of new technologies, do you think that the introduction of machine weaving has created more opportunities for kasuri, or has it contributed to the decline of cultural heritage, maybe by causing it to disappear the manual labor or the manual weaving? Or can these machine weaving techniques and hand weaving coexist?
機械織りと手織りについてで、近代化についてで、その機械化することで産業っていうのは生き延びたと思いますか？それともその産業なんですかね。機械化することで衰退していたと思いますか？またその機械織りとか手織りっていうのはなんか今後残っていったりとかすると思いますか？
そうですね。久留米がすりの場合はですよね。久留米がすりのやっぱり一つ魅力として一つあるのは、両方が共存しているっていうところだと思ってるんですね。これは普通機械化したらやっぱ手織りはなくなっていく、衰退していくものだと思いますけども、久留米がすりっていうのはそれが両方ともうまくミックスされて産地として残っているっていうところがすごく興味深いところだと思ってます。
So the techniques can actually coexist. In other areas or regions that also produce ikat fabrics or kasuri, sometimes on the one hand you have the craftspeople who still practice the craft by hand without using any machines, just hand weaving and also hand dyeing everything. And on the other hand, you have the machine production that is basically for mass production. So there's nothing in between. And with Kurume Kasuri, it's actually something that still goes hand in hand today and probably will, like, also in the future.
その他の、イカットの産地を見てみると、その手織りをして片方では手織りでもう多分天然染料とかですかね、なんかそういう手染めとかなんかそういうので守ってるところと、それと片やその一方大量生産大量消費の機械織りみたいなのでもう全然共存してないっていう共存っていうか全く関係ない風になってるところっていうのもあるんですけど、久留米がすりはそうじゃなくてなんかお互いがそれぞれ手に手を取って共存してるんですね、機械織りと手織りが。
そうですね。お互いにお互いの存在が必要不可欠だと思ってますね。久留米の人たち、職人さんはみんな。
That's, I think if we can preserve that also in the future, that would be really great, because I think losing that entirely, the hand weaving part, also in the face of designers who want to design for Kasuri or Ikat, if you don't really know how it works by hand, it's very hard to understand the process and design for it as well. So I really hope these can, coexist in the future as well, the hand weaving and the machine weaving, and just not just very like skip to the machine weaving altogether.
両方が機械織りと手織りの両方が生き残るといいですね、共存して。というのはやっぱり手織りが失われてしまうとやっぱりデザインの手でのデザインのあり方っていうのが失われてしまうと思うので、やっぱり両方共存していくのがいいと思います。
そうですね。これは僕は共存しているっていうのはもう職人がみんな共存することを望んでいるから共存してきているんですね。そこはすごく誇らしいところだと思ってますね。
Okay. I would like to thank you very much for all your insights and view on the contemporary use of Kasuri. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shimogawa, for your amazing insights on the current state of Kasuri. We are moving forward to our next interview about Digikat with Nien and Hugo.
I'm here with Nien and Hugo, the initiators and participants of Digikat. It's a hackathon looking at the heritage of Ikat through the lens of creative coding. Could you both please shortly introduce yourselves to our viewers? If you would like to start, Nien.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Nien Siao. I'm in design academics, formerly trained as a textile designer. And this was around 30 years ago. I worked in the industry for a decade, moved into education, design education since the last 20 years. And alongside, I've been in touch with the industry through projects and of course with all the new things that are happening in terms of technology. And this is my experimentation with technology and my traditional knowledge of textiles. So we are going to see that very soon. I live in Delhi, and uh, that's where I met Hugo. And Hugo's going to be talking a lot more about how the thought process came about.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and yes, my name is Hugo. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Laura, for the opportunity to share what we did on this project. My background is in industrial design, and since then I've mostly specialized in collaborative design efforts, anything related to co-creation or getting more than one person to kind of work together. And I have a special affinity for creative coding and the way that creative coding can shed new light on how things are made and other practices. So using creative coding to reflect on other practices, not necessarily replace them.
Okay, and I believe you're in the Netherlands in Eindhoven right now. What brought you to Eindhoven?
Yes, well, my partner started a master's program here at the Design Academy Eindhoven, and so we moved here in September.
Okay, yes. Yeah, maybe you would like to explain both what your connection is to Ikat or your affinity with Ikat.
So, as somebody who studied textiles, the traditional textiles of India was a very large part of our curriculum. And besides, beyond the learning years, we have so much of exposure to the textiles, which is still handcrafted, handloomed in India. And we see a lot of that, not only in our commercial markets, but specifically, with a lot of focus on preserving handlooms and handcrafted textiles in India. We come across it very often during the professional exposures that we normally have, let's say during my practice. So that's how I think that Ikat has been a large part of that. Ikat gets produced in some parts of India because of its unique production methods and its unique identity because of the motifs and the aesthetics. It has a lot of value as far as the way the fabrics are viewed, the way it is made into clothing, and specifically the traditional clothing, that is the sari. We see a lot of that, and these are aspects in the country which are talked about with a lot of with high concerns about its disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
There is high chance that these things are getting diluted and produced more for commercial markets. So a lot of very complex and the fine art of Ikat seems to be disappearing because perhaps our craftsmen are not really working on this. Perhaps the market is not appreciating it enough, and there are many such concerns. So I would say that I've worked with Ikat a lot when I worked for a long period in the market, especially handmade, handcrafted markets for furnishings, which was exporting abroad. And I think these markets tried out many of the handcrafted textile techniques in its production. And because it was for exports, because the pricing was really such a focus, I could see that very moment. We could see it that the price was main concern. Ikat was as a technique was, of course, appreciated, but was not really was not being maximized to the kind of motifs or patterns that it could generate. And then later on, I could, though I didn't work in that industry for in the recent times, I've seen that in the recent times I'm starting to see Ikat prints being emulated as Ikat. Of course, they call the patterns as Ikat prints to differentiate it from Ikat itself. But that is really a sad day when the woven technique is not as appreciated as just the motif itself. So that is how I see Ikat now, and these are a matter of concern for many of us in the industry.
Yes, definitely. I also have experience more from the Ikat print side. So I worked for textile factories, and I had these trend boards that I had to design prints for, and yeah, a lot of the times one of the trend boards was Ikat, and then you had to design a print that looks like Ikat but clearly isn't. And also, without my knowledge, that I didn't really have the knowledge. Of course, I knew the hand technique with Ikat, but I didn't really understand it. So, and also, yeah, I think it was quite a disrespectful way to deal with the Ikat heritage, to be honest. So I'm glad I'm educating myself now in the process, and yeah, continue to preserve the craft.
Correct.
Yes. And Hugo, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I brought in more the creative coding aspect, but I have to say that my experience with Ikat, or my awareness of Ikat, was definitely only the prints. And what was also really nice was that a lot of my education in Ikat happened through the Digikat workshop, and because for me the original pitch I made to Nien was about a very surface level kind of visual recreation of the aesthetic. And then a lot of the participants were not okay with this, or were not contented with, it wasn't enough for them to just stick to the aesthetic. And so in the end, we had several groups who decided to try and push it a little further. And so I think that's what's nice about these kinds of practices. One idea sparks it, but then because you're working with a group, you're able to give it more depth than you could have foreseen.
Yeah, definitely.
perhaps many other traditional textiles, with the whole intention of not to really obliterate it and not to change the face of it, but how could it sort of, prop it up further. I think we did talk a little bit about it, and the real ideas came when the youngsters and the coders and the designers came together.
Cool. Can you also briefly explain a bit about the different parts of the Digikat project? Because I believe there are, I think, 5 different projects within the Digikat hackathon.
Correct.
Correct.
You guys want to go with the first one? I think that's really the oracle.
Sure, and maybe I can share my screen at this
Yes,
point for
sure.
some context. I'll just find it. Yes, perfect. Okay. It's not showing up on my end, but can you see it?
No, it's a black screen.
I can't. I think it'll take a while. Just.
Okay.
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
All right. So yeah, and just to set the scene a little bit, Digikat was organized over 4 or 5 meetings, more or less a week apart each, and but very self-organized. So because we were doing it amongst ourselves, it was almost like a study group, and so we were able to say, okay, we need a little more time, we need to change things around here and keep it very flexible. So it was fully self-organized, and we would invite guests and try to break it down into topics, but in general it was a fairly flexible format. And so over the course of 3 weeks we tried to again bring textile practitioners and creative code practitioners to come together and work with each other, learn from each other. And the way we had tried to do it was to say, we did a bit of brainstorm prior to launching it, but we tried to break it down into a few topics. So you had the Ikat primer, starting with what is the craft of Ikat. Then week 2, we tried to look for different kinds of innovations and what does it mean to innovate in the space of textiles. And then we had our final show and tell. And all along the way, we had guest speakers, which you can find on the on this website that I guess we'll share. But briefly, just to go over them really briefly, we had a few different projects. One was more wanting to use QR code technology and AR to try and showcase the origins or better credit the kind of traceability of the hands and the individuals who were involved in making the Ikat fabric. So they started with some more playful spins or playful uses of AR and QR code technology, and then they worked their way towards trying to see how the Ikat aesthetic could be used to then create these sorts of embedded labels that could be unique for each maker or artisan, and how you could then embed information about the craft. So I think you'll see a kind of receipt or information about the piece. So that was one project done by Praveen, Ajitesh, and Yatar. Nien, do you want to speak about the other projects, or should I just keep going through them?
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So the next project by Salil and Maylin was the Ikat generator. And so as you can see on the screen, they were trying to break the process of designing with Ikat into a few sliders and components so that you could kind of experiment with the process. And what was nice was that they started with a very kind of recreation of the Ikat at first, and then they worked their way into adding some more complexity and seeing how far they could push the platform. Then we have Maylin also worked with Samart for the making of Ikat, and this is a really interesting project that tried to create into a mini game or recreate into a mini game the TDS or the TDEM of the Ikat making. So it's both educational on a kind of intellectual level, but also trying to put into context the kind of work that goes into making this kind of tie-dye technique through a few animations, but also mini games where you can see you would slide on the screen to wrap the threads together or lay the ink, for instance. Nien and I also collaborated on our own project. What we wanted to see was how can you pair pattern making and introduce new aesthetics with the process of the cost calculation, and how can the introduction of cost calculation earlier on in the design or through digital tools help bring new voices, new aesthetics. So we looked at reducing the number of colors, the type of thread, and the proportions you see on the screen were to kind of design a type of sari. And depending on the different parameters, the number of threads, colors, so on and so forth, the cost gets changed below. And the final one was an exploration by Komal, Mike, and Natasha, who looked at Ikat in relationship to kolam, I believe, which is a sort of geometric pattern, but also a pattern that has its own history, and maybe Nien can give just a tiny bit more context, but they tried to explore how the two could inform each other to create unique data visualization systems, so its own aesthetic that hybridizes the two and creates interesting new patterns for Ikat.
Right. So I'd just like to add on with kolam. Kolam is a pattern which is made on the floor of many households in a particular part of the country, which is mainly the southern part of India, and they call it kolam. Otherwise, in the northern part of India, we would call it rangoli. It is made with rice paste, and the forms which are generated with that rice paste is generally geometric. And the geometric modules are put together to form larger patterns, which is very similar to what actually takes place in the Ikat formation or the patterns in the Ikat. So this particular group was interested to to sort of compare the two kinds of patterns generated in two different crafts located in the same region, and bring out its value, and at the same time figure out whether forms generated in one craft could be adapted to the other craft, which was Ikat. I thought it was a very interesting research study and could be carried further into more. So we are waiting with all these the 5 projects that were undertaken really focused a lot on maintaining the originality and the base of what Ikat, how Ikat is made, how it is produced, and to give credits, bring the value ultimately to the weavers who really are at the bottom rung of the whole chain. And that's why the Orikat was really a very interesting project where, the QR code is going to really indicate who is the particular weaver of this piece, where the weaver is located, and accordingly, accredit the craft of such a weaver.
Yeah.
With the cost calculator as well, we were very keen that this will empower the weaver, or at least at that stage, to be able to produce designs with the cost factor in mind. They should be able to figure out how much would be the cost if they are adapting a new designs by themselves, and thus with that empowerment, I think they would have a better role to play in the ultimate product and the market. So these are all, I think these are all thoughts and concepts which we started with. We have worked up to a certain stage, and maybe a lot more needs to be done. So it's not that we have got everything figured out, but I think it's a good beginning.
Yeah, definitely. What I really like is that in a relative short time, you came up with 5 really good concepts that could actually be applied. That's why I think the Digikat is a super good example on how to see how Ikat can play a role in contemporary times with preserving the original and traditional craft. Yeah, would you like to add
just
something?
one small note on this. I think, what's important for us also to highlight is that we're not saying that technology is here to solve everything, and these are more as provocations or thought starters. And if anything, if they can help show that you try the cost calculator and it doesn't work, then we hope that it can save a lot of people a lot of money in investing in this kind of technology down the line. It's not just to say we need this technology, it's to say here's an affordable way to test its relevance. We've put in this amount of work, we've put it in open source so that we can start prototyping its use in a way that's hopefully a little more fair than having to pay to even see the software, or in which we assume the power dynamic may be a little different.
Yeah.
So and we're more than happy, I think, to find new collaborators to actually take these forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. What do you think are the most interesting findings of the Digikat hackathon?
If I look at all the projects that were undertaken, firstly, I do think that it was a big learning for all the people who were involved. So those who were, of course, from the traditional textiles background, we understood what was possible, but didn't really understand what the creative coding could add on to an existing craft, which actually really had its huge history, didn't seem to be able to do much beyond physical manual support. But this was a perspective which was brought up, and it created a lot of dialogue. It created thinking. It created a lot of, resistance as well. A lot of resistance from traditional textiles experts, and they felt it's going to sort of intervene, perhaps not in a positive way. But we did also have support equally from experts who felt we needed to. So, coming together of perhaps, I feel, different millennial groups along with traditionalists. The coders themselves figured I thought, had a great exposure to a technique which perhaps they didn't even look at earlier. So that was another one. But I think that these new ideas are going to push both the groups to at least explore it. Many of these ideas, such as the one being developed, the game being developed on Ikat, was extremely interesting because this really touched the heart of what could be done in a new arena. You develop a game which shows the process of such a technique and allows the player to develop patterns and hence related to how the technique would be enabled to create such a pattern. Now, if this is what can be done with one craft or one technique, I'm very sure that with so many other techniques, at least in our country, we can really do a lot more with every other of that. And I do feel there'll be more awareness amongst the real young people, as well as individuals who are so technology oriented. They don't understand anything of the handmade crafts. I think it'll bridge that gap. So this is what I would look forward to.
Yeah, I think it's a super good example.
Hugo?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to add something to that?
Maybe just a note that I think the generational gap, though, was not a straight line. I think even from the coder side, we had plenty of people who started from the beginning saying, we're not here to just appropriate this content, and who were also concerned with the result of Digikat, who were saying, okay, well, we set out to empower artisans, and what did we manage to do? Considering that, some of the partnerships we were hoping would result from this did not always pan out, right? And so I think that was also interesting to see that you have a lot of people who are, trying to stand by this, and I think we trusted each other, and they trusted Nien and I also in this process, that we were going in with our best intentions, and I think that's really nice I don't think there's a clear older generations being against tech and protective or conservative, and the newer generations being completely exploration and ravenous. I think it was nice to see that even in the group there was a little bit of mix there as well. Yeah.
Nicely explained.
Yeah.
I noticed that in one of your webinars you stated innovation and diversification of Ikat should not kill the technique, and I thought that was very powerful. But how do you think these new innovations and techniques go hand in hand with the traditional handmaking craft, or how can they coexist?
I'd love to try and answer first, Nien, because
Yes,
this reminds me of a very specific call I had with Binarao,
Right.
who is one of our guests, and she was here, I think, for the second one on innovation in textile. And there was a very clear kind of internalized or personal math she would do, saying, I work with a community of about 300 craftsmen, so there are a few pros and cons, which said at the end of the day, if it can improve their lives and really kind of remove the tedium, that's the number one reason for investing in a form of innovation, and that's probably a mechanized thing. As of right now, innovation is very much in the machines, in the looms still, that can simplify the process for them or remove some of the physical burden. But that kind of language, and so that was also one of the reasons why creative coding was not as relevant for her. That it did not have a direct impact on the quality of life or simplifying the way that Ikat is done for the human and the human ergonomics of the process.
True. I think Hugo sort of really got the gist of it. But if you actually, reflecting on whether this really made an impact on, would it make an impact on the weavers? I think it's about also, it's not to take away all the other efforts which have to be done in relation to perhaps organizing the groups of weavers, getting the market for them, getting the product diversification, access to innovation in patterns, and those are being done and has to be done beyond what a new innovation such as the one that we are proposing. That still needs to be done. But while we were working on this, I think we had a lot of concern about being able to, how can we empower not just the substance itself, not just the concept to the Ikat industry, but empower the weavers and that particular space, the whole ecosystem, to be able to get to understand it, and perhaps some kind of innovation could come from that side. I mean, that is of course steps much beyond what we were doing, but we really felt that if only the weavers at some stage could really understand and have access to such kind of innovations, perhaps there would be some developments coming from their end as well. So of course these are just speculations. We don't even know how to go about doing it. We don't know whether it would be useful. But the idea was that these innovations are to be made so that actually it benefits ultimately not only the weavers, the markets, and the whole supply chain.
And on that point, a really short note is that in doing our secondary research and exploring innovation in digital innovation in the textile space in India, we had found a government-funded program of pattern design softwares being rolled out in more rural communities, and we tried really hard to find someone from there, but it had been inactive for a few years now, and we could not find a guest from there. But I think it's also really interesting how I feel like then open sourcing from the beginning helps a little bit that longevity, you know, that you still have to happen upon the work, but at least there's a little more, it's easier to pick up where the work has been left off.
Yeah, and everyone can keep on adding to it, I think. So that's very important because, of course, like these concepts or ideas are never like game changing in the beginning, but they can lead to maybe super useful innovations for weavers in the future, hopefully. Hugo, in 2015, you also created a code or an ode to shibori, explaining or exploring how the patterns created by Japanese tie-dyeing technique called shibori can be digitized using code. I was wondering what inspired this project?
Yes, I was so happy that I'm so happy you bring it up. It's, I mean, this is where it kind of started, and 2013, 14 is when I was learning creative coding and processing, and around that time, or a little earlier, but in 2012, I was lucky enough to do a study abroad in Japan for 3 months, and so there we were exposed to several different crafts, including shibori and tie-dyeing, and so this is where the sort of learning about a craft by not digitizing it, but doing some sort of mirroring exercise of trying to replicate it, to one, celebrate all the things that you cannot do through the digital, but also just to spend more time sitting with it. That's where I started doing a lot of these things, and so that was the first one. But it's very similar to it's the seed for Digikat.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any plans to continue with these Digikat hackathons? And if so, are there any things you would like to do differently within future hackathons, or anything you could use help with?
Yes, I think there is deep interest in, or at least all the people who participated in this, to carry forward. We did look around for, any collaborators who would like to, who could be working on such things. And we brought them onto the webinars. But I think we need to really look beyond and far and beyond, and find out more people who could really work with this and get some kind of funding, so that will give us more specific focus, and we will then have to figure it out, because I do think these ideas are pretty interesting. Many of them can be carried forward, which can culminate into actually something worthwhile. So this is what I feel. Hugo, you have to now really figure out more.
So on this topic specifically, I think Digikat, but at large hackathons that use digital tools to look at crafts and different hands-on practices is something that I really enjoy doing, and there's some other workshops like Museo Mix that I've been involved with, and so there's always room for that. Specifically for Digikat, I think this is where the creative coding community, I feel, is much more tightly knit, or at least as a open source hobby culture, not a professional industry, right? It has that as well, but I'm saying that there's a lot of room to find collaborators and to have these sort of informal encounters and to try things out together, send each other a bit of code and things like that. And so I think that's one thing I would do differently. Maybe it's to try and reach out to more creative coding. I think the fear was to say, oh, if we push the tech side too much, then we will erase the kind of the textile discussion. But now I'm seeing that maybe if that can bring money that can help elevate the textile discussion, then that's fine. That's just in our framing of the event and the effort that then we have to make that clear. But I think that would be a little more strategic. And the second one would be making sure to onboard partners who are, to make it explicit that they would be willing to test the solutions in their practice. And I think, especially now being in the Netherlands, there are a few great kind of textile museums, or it doesn't have to be those who participate in the event necessarily, but I think being able to say from the get-go, we're going to be able to work, test this prototype out for a month, or have multiple meetings. That I think so far that really was the missing point.
Okay.
And so I would kind of design that into the next Digikat.
Mm-hmm. And also maybe like really, I think you explained in one of the webinars that it was kind of hard to get the artisans to participate as well, like the local weaving communities. Is there a way that we could actually, draw them in, or?
Completely. I mean, COVID did add a layer of complication. So Nien, I saw you wanted to answer. So that was one thing, but otherwise, Nien, what do you think?
I think also, so we did bring in people who are working closely with the craftsmen, such as Beena Rao, and we also had Gunjan Jain, Titli. So with all these people on board, so they work with the craftsmen, they have their groups of craftsmen, or they're in touch with them pretty often. If we are to carry forward the Digikat, then yes, we'd like to work with them, and we would love to collaborate with them further and take it ahead, or get in touch with some groups. But individually, since they stay in states where language could be a barrier, because they would be speaking different language. So we would have to approach through people who can speak their language and who work with them closely. So that could be one way. And of course, we couldn't do it physically at all because of the COVID.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
And also, do you think maybe, like what I notice often is that maybe in more rural areas, there's more problems with electricity or Wi-Fi, or maybe access to computers in general? Or is that not the case?
Well, it's not so bad these days.
Okay.
I would think that, yes, Wi-Fi would be available. They may not have their own systems, but they would have mobiles. I don't know if they would have smartphones though. So that's why probably going through a channel would at least expose us to, accessibility of these people. And so I don't know really the same. I don't have enough access to this particular Ikat weavers. But there are Ikat weavers in different parts of India. We have them in Orissa, we have them in Telangana, and some in Gujarat. So the Gujarat ones, of course, I don't know if you're aware, there is a technique of double Ikat called Patola in Gujarat, but there's only one family doing it. And they are very well known, so very popular, and to access them may not be a problem. But then the idea is to also look at the other two states, and there we will have to go through people.
Yeah.
And to add to this, I think, I mean, the technology or the portal to access the technology would not be, I think, an issue. We would find a workaround. So that's why I was highlighting also the COVID pandemic, but also being mindful of their time and schedules and all of this. But one of the participants, Yatar, who worked on the QR and AR code, is working with TB Dinesh, who's a kind of a design maker activist who works a lot with kind of pirate radio stations and DIY and electronics in rural areas. And and so there's a bit happening on that front as well. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That's interesting, Hugo.
Yeah. Cool.
New things, yes.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I would like to thank you both for this super interesting conversation and showing this great initiative. I think our viewers will enjoy it very much, and hopefully we will all be inspired, and let's see where the future will take us.
With
Thank
pleasure.
you, Laura.
And
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nien and Hugo, for an interesting conversation and initiative. We are moving on to the conclusion part by Laura.
In this webinar, we have explored what role Kurume Kasuri can play in contemporary design. We have heard the point of view of a Japanese Kurume Kasuri expert, Kyozo Shimogawa, and how international design collaborations can help spark renewed interest for local crafts and design heritage. We have also explored contemporary design approaches by including new disciplines like creative coding, as seen in the Digikat example explained by Nien and Hugo. In the third upcoming webinar, the future of Kurume Kasuri will be discussed. Follow CCD-NL to stay updated. All that's left is thank you to all our viewers for watching this webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to our contributing guests, Kyozo Shimogawa, Nien Siao, and Hugo Pilate. And of course to CCD-NL. We hope to see you in the next one. Bye.
We have reached the end of this webinar, and we would like to invite Karina, the co-coordinator of CCD-NL Kasuri project, to say her closing speech.
On behalf of CCD-NL, I would like to thank all the people who participated in this webinar. This webinar mainly explored ways of collaborating between the Japanese and Dutch artisans and different perspectives of their works. I hope with all the interviews with our talented participants, the traditional art form of Kurume Kasuri has become more understandable and accessible to our audience. Thank you, Laura, for her devotion and willingness to make this webinar happen. Thank you, Mr. Shimogawa, for his experience and talent. Thank you, Nien Siao and Hugo Pilate, for their new perspective. Thank you, Kim Eguchi, for the interpretation and the translation. Thank you for answering all the questions and for the great presentations. It was a pleasure to have you with us and to work with you. We hope to collaborate in future. Of course, thank you CCD-NL staff who worked really hard for this webinar. Thank you the audience. And to conclude this webinar, I would like to thank you all for attending. We hope you have learned and enjoyed the art of Kurume, and see you at our future events.
Thank you everyone for your participation in this webinar. We hope that this webinar helped you better understand the current state of Kasuri and the CCD-NL Ikat platform campaign. You can support our campaign by following us on all social media platforms, and you can also donate your gift from this link. Help our co-coordinator of Japanese Ikat, Amalia, to raise just €5 from your pocket. Donate through this link. Now we thank you very much for your participation again, and thank you to everyone who have donated generously to our crowdfunding campaign that helped the continuation of the Kasuri project. And we wish that you will have a good day. Bye bye!